All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to another United States Police Canine Association webinar. This time we're going to do part 3 of a 3-part series on scent work fundamentals. Today we talk about patrol dog strategies and tactics. Now, in the first session, we talked about odor production and transmission. Then the second time was for detector dog strategies. Now we're going to wrap it up with what patrol dogs have to do, both in terms of search dog strategies and tracking or trailing dog strategies. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and start cruising through this right now. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have ourselves a bit of a journey today. But before I get into that, I want you to notice that down at the bottom of the page, there are a couple of YouTube links. And if you follow them, they will take you to the United States Police Canine Association webinar series for this scent work fundamental series. Part 1 is at the first link. Part 2 is at the second link. Throughout the course of this presentation, you'll see some red YouTube links. Those will take you to related topics that we have already produced with the best practices group for the USPCA. So without any more further ado, and by the way, all of those links will be embedded in the YouTube presentation when it gets uploaded to the USPCA's YouTube channel. And you'll be able to just drop the description bar down, click the link, and it'll take you to those previous presentations that are related to what we're talking about today. So as we go through this, one of the things we have to realize is that all search work is basically behavior chains. And we want to talk about the basic chains because how chains are constructed and what is important in them is fundamental to having success in your working dog efforts. So the second thing we're going to talk about is the roles. We have different roles. And if you haven't seen it, there's an old article we posted a while back about a division of labor in this, and that handlers have a role, dogs have a role, and the team together has a role. And we need to make sure that we stay in our roles and don't try and get in the way of the dog when we're doing this. And to do this, we have to have an overarching search strategy. And we'll talk about that a little more because we really want to dive into the tactics of searching. As we talk about search tactics, one of the things that we want to talk about are the way we decide we're going to go ahead and recover when things don't go the way we thought they would. Same thing happens with tracks. So we have strategies and tactics that we have to address with those too. The other thing that we'll talk about, well, I'm not going to go ahead and put it in this one, but you should see a reference to it. I want to do a future video that will talk about criminal flight tendencies. This is based on research that was done in Canada back in the 1980s. The basic fundamental human principles are the same, but things have changed, and we want to talk about that. So we'll dive into that in a separate video that we'll talk about. As we go through this, one of the things that want to talk about when it comes to the behavior chains is that the dog's job, we all know, is to search. And that is the thing that we tend to focus on a lot of times when we're training, that they're looking for any whiff of the suspect's scent. But we have to realize that their job, once they find a whiff, is to try and locate the strongest concentration of suspect scent available. Now, when it comes to searching, it's a non-discriminative task. Unless you've done a match to sample and you have an odor sample to give that dog, they're just going to find anybody in a given area. That's the difference between searching and tracking or trailing. Tracking and trailing can be a discriminative activity. They will pick the person they started on. Whereas when it comes to behavior search chains that we've got here, they're just going to locate this, and we're hoping that's that. So the way this works, it's up to us to ensure that we have innocent parties out of the area and that the only person that could be there could be a suspect. When you're doing a search dog, that's an important piece of this. And search dogs should also locate and report on handled articles. Once you get there, you got to have a report, and they're going to report that location of the strongest concentration of odor. And there are different ways the report can be done. If that person's accessible, then they will, for example, for a patrol, they may grab them. Or if you train them, they may bark at them. If they're not accessible, they should bark at you or have some way to tell you that this is the strongest place right here. Also, when it comes to things like handled articles that the person has handled, you probably don't want the dog picking those things up and carrying them. And that lesson was conveyed to me in my early days but with a patrol dog when my dog came out carrying a cocked revolver by the trigger guard dangling off of one of his teeth. That was the moment I said, yeah, I never want my dog retrieving an article again. And it was kind of fun to watch all the other cops in the area kind of start ducking for bushes and getting behind patrol cars when the dog came out of the bush with that. So humorous story, not such a humorous situation. So as we cruise through this, let's take a look at what happens when we're going to start searching. And we want to look at things that we're going to consider. First and foremost, before you start worrying about, I've got to get to the down one side and all the other stuff with this, your tactics are going to come first. You've got to think about your patrol officer tactics. You are still a cop. Just because you're handling a dog doesn't mean you should break tactics, and it doesn't mean you should pull other people out of their tactics. It's very important. So as we go through this, and we've got that in mind, you're still going to try and harness the wind whenever you can. You want to take the wind into that and realize that things like sunlit walls or warm objects are going to create updrafts that may take scent away from where your dog can smell it. Not only that, but then they may allow it to be carried by the wind and drop down somewhere else. So think about what you're looking at, where there are places that are going to affect the movement of air and the scent that goes with it. Also consider that doors and windows can have a venturi effect and can suck things in or push things out. You want to realize that as you go through this, the difference in temperature between stone and wood on a wall can be enough to change the way the air flows around them and make it a little more difficult for your dog to pinpoint something. Don't think the dog is bad. Just understand it is something they're not familiar with yet. Also, look for overhangs, because one of the things about overhangs, particularly large, hard physical awnings, as air flows over a building, for example, imagine right now the air is blowing into my ear right this. And then as it hits there, it can't get by, so it builds up pressure. And as it builds up pressure, some of that pressure will wrap around in front and behind, but some of it will go up and over. And if it goes up and over right there, both and same thing there, when it gets to this other side, now all of a sudden there's a low pressure zone. And so things then will start to swirl in from the outside back towards that low pressure zone in the building. So even though they're carried up here, out all the way over here, they're going to swivel back in. We go from there. All right. Now, overhangs will affect that. They'll create a doubly low pressure zone right there. And you'll see that things will want to curl not only back to the building, but up. And your dog could walk right underneath somebody and not know they're there, even though the overall wind is moving in a direction you would think that they would be able to. So bear in mind, these are places that you have to get out away from as you move through this. You want to get away from them and see if your dog's behavior changes. Very often what will happen is they'll move out away from it. They'll pick it out here. As they get close, it's now over their head. They can't smell it, and they want to circle back and stay out here. As soon as you see that happen, where your wind is coming from this side and your dog starts to sniff around here, but then loses it getting close, consider the fact that you probably have two danger zones. There may be something out here way over this way, but there could be something up here, somebody laying on that roof that you can't see. So bear in mind, you got two danger zones, particularly if your dog runs underneath the scent and you can't pick it up. Also, vegetation. Vegetation can be a heat source that will make things rise, particularly trees. They're big. They are a heat source, particularly during the autumn and winter months. You'll see that they create a pretty pronounced updraft. And if somebody climbs a tree, that scent's going to go up there, get diffused by the foliage. And then as it drops downwind, it's going to have a very diffuse arc. Dog's going to give you soft indications that aren't as solid as they are when they have a clear, strong wind. Bear it in mind. When you see those soft indications that you can't pick it up, it's probably worth your while to have somebody start really scanning those trees with a good, powerful flashlight to see if they can pick up something that doesn't belong there. Also, drainage systems, because they have cooler water moving in there, tend to be heat sinks. That means they pull air towards them. And, at that point, you'll see scent to start to concentrate by them. Not only drainage systems, but things like railroad tracks and other cold heat sinks that you'll have in your environment. Also realize traffic's going to have an impact. It's going to move air around, create turbulence. That turbulence is going to cause problems for your dog. And you may want to wait till that happens or reroute traffic around your search area so that you can make sure that your dog is processing scent that is not being so heavily disturbed. So as we talk about all of this, I've been talking a lot about what the dog is likely to encounter, what the dog's supposed to do. So let's take a look at it. We need dogs that are eager to search. My buddy Randy Hare taught me years ago something that I probably should have taken more closely to heart earlier in my career. I realize now you got to have a dog that's got 80% of what you need. If you want a top quality team, you're only going to be able to put 20% of what you need in there because good dogs already know how to do everything we need. They just need to know how to do it the way we need it done when we need it done. That means you got to have a dog that has the focused energy, not just the energy, this ping pong ball and a windstorm energy, the focus energy to maintain a search. They have to have behavioral stamina. They have to be a dog that can recognize the odor. They have to have the physical capacity. There is a degree of sensitivity that some dogs have that other dogs don't. And that's one of the things you want to test for when you're selecting a dog. Years ago, Larry Meyer at Auburn University tried to do studies in which he measured dogs' ability to scent and found there was a considerable amount of variability. Research never got published, but it is something to bear in mind. You really want dogs that do this. The old Germans years ago preferred dogs with dark pigmented nose, dark pigmented cells because they believed those dogs tended to have better nose. I don't know. All I know is I've seen some dogs that could not find their food dish from the downwind side if they were starving, and then other dogs that could pick it up a mile away. Bear in mind, you want to pick a dog that shows you they have the capabilities that you need. And they have to be able to and willing to give you some kind of behavior at the strongest available concentration of scent. All right. Now we're talking about people, looking for people here or something handled by people. That strongest available concentration of scent is a point, a place. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it will be where that person is. Sometimes it may be on the other side of the room because of the way the airflow dynamics are. So you have to make sure that your dog trusts his nose and you don't do things to train them out of trusting their nose. Taking a dog that finds the strongest available concentration and then forcing them to go to a spot that you think is right because it's closer to the odor source may actually do damage if you're not careful about how you do it. Then once they're there, they've got to be able to give you some kind of report behavior, something that says, I found it. That reporting behavior, whether you want to call it an alert, whether you want to call it trained final response, doesn't matter. The job is the same. It's here. This is the strongest odor I can find. This is it. This is what I want to tell you about. And they got to be willing to do this in any environment. And say this for last, but the reality is this would be one of the first things you pick for. You want to pick a dog that will do this anytime, anywhere. And so that means that dog's got to be comfortable anytime, anywhere before you teach them all this stuff. So the first thing I look for is environmental competence. I look for a dog that is comfortable in its own skin, is self-right, moves through the world thinking everything's fine, but doesn't go around frantically looking for a fight or doesn't have unchanneled energy. I want that dog to be clear and focused on the task. Once you have all of this together, especially if you're dealing with things that are dangerous, you want a dog that's directable and that you can send him somewhere and you can have him check something at a distance away from you. And you have a dog that is stoppable. And we'll talk more about that later when we get to tracking. But this directability is really an important thing. Those are the things the dog has to be able to do. First and foremost, their biggest piece of this is they've got to be willing to search and tell you that they found something. And you got to be something where you're not at odds with your dog and they can do this for you when you need. As we go through this, when we get to the handler's roles, your first job is to take all of those things the dog has and all of those qualities we just talked about and ensure that they are put to work in a systematic way. You got to make sure that the dog is checking productive areas or areas that are likely to be productive. Before we started this presentation, the group was talking about looking for IEDs and combat zones. And there are places that, yeah, this is a high risk location. You want to make sure those are checked. Same way in situations like this, you want to make sure your dog hits those areas where they're likely to find scent and tell you there is or isn't something there. Your job then is to read the dog. And what you're looking for are the changes of behavior that tell you that they're working scent. The information that the dog gives you is yours to analyze and then convey to your team. Your job is to talk to your team and give them intelligence about what's going on. And by the way, The police dog, everybody wants to talk about de-escalation now, is one of the most powerful de-escalation tools there is because it can tell you that there's something around that corner that you can't see. It can tell you there's something behind that door that you can't see. And at that point, you can stop and try and generate compliance. And we all know bite work is sexy. Bite work is fun. People love to do it. People think that's stuff we can replace with all sorts of other tools. We can't replace the dog's ability to tell us there's somebody around that corner. There's somebody over there. That is powerful stuff that will keep everybody safe. So with the dog and the handler having those two different roles, then the team's jobs are pretty simple. You pretty much are walking point. You're the one that's out front trying to pick up on threats, pick up on evidence, things that need to happen. You're the ones that will probably locate the suspect. And also, your job is to say, nothing here. Give people confidence moving through space after they do that. Once an area is clear, it's up to everybody else to figure out how do they secure that area. And your job is to identify places where something doesn't seem right. Your dog's change of behavior. Maybe they don't give you that trained final response, but that's something of a concern. And then to help the team resolve these things. Once you get that stuff resolved, you can go ahead and do the rest of your job in this. When we talk about search strategies, there are things that we're going to do. We're going to look and search open areas. We're going to search buildings. We're going to search the exterior perimeters that are fenced, things like that. We'll search interior spaces. As you move deeper into the building, the space changes. Exterior walls will have different temperature than interior walls. Airflow will change. You've got to consider all this stuff. And as you do it, you got to remember, no matter what happens, you're still there to be a police officer. Your job as a cop is to make sure that you keep everybody in their tactics and you're not pulling the dog out. You define the search team roles before you start searching and you let everybody know, I'm not the team leader. The best practices group has already talked about this before. You should not be the team leader on this. You may be walking point and leading the team in that regard. But as far as making calls and doing this stuff, your job is to read and watch the dog and control the dog. And if you're trying to do that and give commands to people at the same time, people get confused about who's supposed to lie down and who's supposed to put their hands up and things like that. It's a very, very important. The other thing that you need to do is also be the one that has the presence of mind to not just follow the dog. Sometimes pauses are appropriate. Time to get the team back into its tight formation, time to get everything considered before we move into a space we haven't controlled yet. This is all really important when you're doing these searches for suspects in an area, building, or any kind of space like that. If you're looking for an article, really, then it should be done after all that other stuff is done, or maybe along a track, and we'll talk about that later on. But when it comes to search time, you get to secure a scene first before you even think about, I'm going to focus on looking for articles. And then you got to make sure that you have the lawful presence to be there, that you're entitled to be in that space in that moment. Once you get going with all of that, you can move on. We talked about this when we were doing the detector dog presentation on part 2 of this series, the outside to inside concept. And that means basically you're going to secure as you go, moving through spaces like that. Secure those areas. And maybe before you even walk it, swing wide and take a survey of the area, get an idea of what you're facing before you get into it. Look beyond the building's footprint. As I described before, somebody hiding on a roof may put scent out in such a way that you can't detect it until you're on the other side of the parking lot around that building. So consider that as those are all things that you have to do when you're doing a building search. Consider peripheral objects, how they're going to hold things, buildings, cars, trucks, things like that. Other places where people can hide are still in the game. And as you search, realize doors and windows and those overhangs that we talked about are going to control or impact the way air flows and the way scent flows. And then once you've done the exterior and you've done that peripheral swing around that, then you start moving interior. If you have the ability to survey or get intelligence about something before you do that, survey that first. The big thing is before you enter, maybe somebody takes a slow pie and gives somebody a sense of what's going on. If you make a decision that you're going to do dynamic entries, That means as soon as you go in, you've got to do that survey scan, looking for threats all the way through the space, and then break it down to detail. Then as you work from the perimeter of that room inward, you'll look at all the objects that could hide a person or hide a thing that you're looking for. I recommend that as you go through this, you have somebody secure your entry point and make sure that you've got containment on your exit point so that there's a good chance you're going to put pressure on somebody. They're going to try and get away. And many a suspect is lost because we haven't had somebody on the outside to do containment. In Seattle, when we were in our heyday and our tracks were really at their most successful, every time we stop training officers to give us good containment, we start having a reduction in effectiveness. So it's really important to control entry and exit points. And it's really important as you go through this that you deal with rooms and objects in a systematic way. And if that means you need more people to do your search, then you pause it and you get those people if you possibly can. Now, I realize if you're a one horse town and you're the only law enforcement officer there and you get a backup maybe from a deputy coming from 20 minutes away, don't start stuff until that deputy gets there at a minimum. Now, I was lucky. I finished my career in a city where we had a 3 officer minimum before we could search a building. We always did that. All our search tactics were built around that. Now, I realize that's a luxury because before that, I worked as a deputy sheriff where it would be me and one other deputy covering an entire county. I'd have the south half, he or she'd have the north half, and we were 25, 35, sometimes 40 minutes away from each other at best. And so I realized one size does not fit all. The important thing is you're going to get out of here and come home. And that means, if anything, if you're by yourself, that means slow and deliberate is even more important. As we go through this, look at your other tactics. Remember that air doesn't respect boundaries. It will go wherever it goes. And your job is to maintain your tactics while considering the airflow. Don't put yourself in jeopardy just to get to the downwind side. If there's no way to get to the downwind side and start your work from the downwind side because of the exposure you would get, all right, you're going to get stuck working from the upwind side or crosswind. Just realize that these are considerations. Generally speaking, with that being said, if it possible, you want to work crosswind from the downwind side. So you want to go from where the wind is blowing to where it's blowing to, and you want to work across that because it gives your dog the best chance of working into the odor plume and coming up with something. And we'll talk about the recovery strategies, particularly the TD and spiral approaches to recovering a search when maybe the dog gets out of the plume. So, primarily, first off, what I'm talking about is downwind, working crosswind from the downwind side. So you're trying to go perpendicular to the wind whenever you can. Geography is going to get in the way of that. Topography is going to get in the way of that. Building structures, all that stuff. But when possible, it saves you time to work from the downwind side and it can be safer for you. You work that way until the dog shows a change of behavior, and then you act on that change of behavior. It may be that you want to take a couple quick steps with that dog and get it in. You may want to follow it all the way to source. The circumstances are going to dictate your tactics at that moment. But the one thing about working from downwind, you get detection at a greater distance than you do if you try to come at them from the upwind side. So this is about officer safety. Also, it's a good idea to make your search area bigger than the boundaries that you've been given, if all possible, because as we said, wind doesn't obey boundaries and therefore scent carried on the wind doesn't either. So what it looks like is this. Let's say this blue area is our search area. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start from the downwind side. So if the subject is up here, the wind's down there, you're going to see a plume that flows like that. I don't know where my subject is, but I know I'm going like this. So I'm going to walk my dog across the downwind side, just outside the boundary, somewhere outside that boundary. Once I've gone across, I'm going to move upwind a little bit, then back across, upwind, then back across, upwind and back across, just like that. And at some point, my dog may exhibit a change of behavior and on their own start saying, no, I want to go into the wind. At that point, you'll see the dog tighten up its casting on its own. So you've been quartering the field, and then now they're going to cast their way up there across that scent plume, playing the hot and cold game until they get to the source. If you work from upwind, imagine this, that you're going to come here and you're going to bump into this person right away. You may not smell them until you're right on top of them. Or worse yet, if you're, right down here, downwind, you may get a little notice, but you won't have the advantage of this. And remember the tactical concepts model, time, distance, angles, and shielding. Well, this gives you distance, and that distance gives you more time to consider what you're going to do. You have more opportunities to see, have I got shielding? Have I got cover? Have I got concealment along the way here? And I can control angles. At this point, if I'm here and I'm right with my dog, that's a problem. If I do this, the dog's out of that, well, maybe I'm gonna go ahead, down my dog, stop, get off to the side, and then have him move up a little bit, down him again, move up a little bit, so that now we create a targeting problem. If I'm right behind my dog, all somebody has to do is go bang, bang, just, from bang, bang. But if I'm off to the side, they've got to adjust and come back in to target. So buying lateral space really works to your advantage as you're proceeding. Another thing to consider is that sometimes when the dog gets to that plume, they go off track. So you're going to see the same thing you saw before. When you see your dog lose that change of behavior, you're going to stop. You're going to go back farther downwind, and you're going to go back crosswind again to give the dog a chance to reacquire the scent plume in a way that they can process it. Going back that way, come back crosswind, and if you don't come up with anything, you're gonna go back to quartering again. So it looks like this. We've gone through the same process that we had before. Dog goes up here, starts like that, and then he loses it. At that point, you go back downwind, green arrow, go back a crosswind. If the dog picks it up, great, you're gonna follow it up. If the dog doesn't, go back crosswind again. If that doesn't work, then loop back down and start a little farther down, start your quartering again to clear your area. Your job is to find somebody or to clear the area. The D is very similar to the T in many ways. The dog is going to do this, and rather than just going cross and back at the same thing, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead, come across, and then make an arc. So you've gone through the same process where the dog loses the scent, and that point, you're going to go across like that, all the way to the other side, and rather than coming straight back on the same line as you do with the D, you're just gonna arc down, and if nothing happens, you're gonna continue, pick back up with your quartering from there. Some people will prefer instead to go back and go farther downwind again to give a chance to reacquire that plume. The whole point is trying to get that dog to a place that you had evidence was a productive area. If the dog gave you a change of behavior, that might be evidence. Now, maybe it was something the dog was just interested in that wasn't a suspect, and you'll have to sort that out. But right there, that's the last piece of information you had that something's worth following up. And the final approach is similar. It's the spiral. When the dog loses this, rather than you're moving in a linear form, you're going to arc. And a lot of people do this just by casting the dog in a loop at the end of their long line and returning crosswind as they go. So as they do a series of arcs, you can see it. So again, same process. We've quartered, dog picks it up, dog loses it. And at that point, I'm going to arc back, continuing to arc, and then I'm back on my line again and I can restart. Each of these approaches has advantages and disadvantages. And not that one is superior to the other, but one may be more suitable for the terrain and the situation you have at hand and your search resources. So practice them all, get good at all of these recovery strategies so that you can pull them out of your toolkit when you need each one. Now, when we're in indoor spaces, we have to remember that we're constrained by that space, and there's usually more stuff around us, and that means there are more opportunities for us to get ambushed. It's a riskier safety. So you got to realize your officer safety tactics have to come first, and you all have to be on the same page. Now, this is tough for us as canine handlers because a lot of us do mutual aid things and we're working with other agencies. When that happens and we're working with another agency, they may have a different approach. They may have, when they identify and they see a suspect ahead of them, my agency just said, you challenge that person right there. You get behind something big enough to stop bullets if you can, you challenge them, everybody else will follow your lead. I worked with another agency one time where they said, what we do is we try to keep it low key and we just say front sight. And that means everybody look at where my front sight is pointed. All right. I don't care. They have advantages and disadvantages. It's all about the trade-offs. But make sure everybody's on this front page, because if nobody told me that before I went to search and they're saying front sight, there's a good chance I'm just going to be oblivious to that and go as I'm wandering through my search area. Not a good idea. So get your tactics squared away. And then consider this, that not only do you have all the airflow considerations we had outside where the sun can do this, but you have the artificial things that can come from, ventilation, HVA system, things like that. You're going to have hot walls that are created that way because maybe they're on the inside and they're heated, and the cold walls are the ones that are exposed. They're going to be outside. And then it could flip. If you have a building that's not heated, but it's a hot day, then your hot walls are going to be outside walls and the interior walls will be the cold walls. You're going to have false floors and false ceilings, things like that to consider where people can hide. Computer rooms tend to have a lot of false floors. So getting your dog to be able to indicate on something lower than its head, that's a good skill if you work in a technological area where they have a lot of computer rooms, server rooms, and things like that, because they route that stuff 18 inches under the floor with a false floor. You pick up a floor plate, drop somebody in there and hide them. So think about the environment you're in. Make sure that you're considering everything there, not just what you can see. And if your dog gives you a change of behavior, that's an indication. Maybe you've got to pause and look and see how this gets processed together. We talked about this earlier, and I'm just going to say that if you want to know more about this, go down to the presentation about training to tactics, because rather than training for our certification standards or for our competition standards, training for the way we actually work should be done in such a way that we're so good at what we do with that, it subsumes any standard you're going to see in competition or certification. So that means get very good as a unit and then get together with search teams. If you got a quiet night, get the other patrol officers with you and say, hey, let's practice moving together as a team. It would be really good for my dog. Take it on yourself to be the one to say, look, I need this work. Will help us. In the process, they learn something too. Once you've done a couple of that, you get officers who are enthusiastic about it. Guess who can be your lobbying thing when you try to get the department to make this a department-wide thing where we're going to teach everybody how to do this. So get some buy-in from key people and get good at this stuff. Because once you get it to the whole department, life gets a whole lot better. Now, another presentation worth it is that canine command and control. This is the one where we make the case for the canine team. The canine handler should not be the team leader. He or she may walk point, but they should not be the team leader because their job is to handle and manage the dog. And if they're trying to do that and yell at suspects and or direct people, it gets chaotic and the dog will get confused. And that's where bad bites happen. Look, let's think about this. Let's get our egos in check and make sure that we do the best we can with the role that we've got that nobody else can replace. So you want to take into account all the factors you're going to face when you get going for tracking. Now, this is the bread and butter. Where I worked, 87% of our deployments were tracks or trails. Building search, area search, handler protection, direct pursuit, evidence, discrete evidence search without it being on a track, all amounted to 13% through many of the years that we're doing that. It's a little more diverse now, but tracking centric aging. So for me, I'm looking for the factors that are going to make things work for me. So what we're good at, what we started at in that we worked in a suburban environment, urban was not as much of a consideration, but as Seattle became more urbanized, we had to change the way we worked. So you need to understand what's going on. And before you go out and search and you conduct this track, you need to have a good tactical briefing and have everybody's roles and responsibilities and expectations clear. That means what happens when you find somebody, you locate that suspect, whether it's an evidence or a suspect, it doesn't matter. Everybody has to know what's going on. If they get all interested in what the dog's doing and they stop looking at the periphery, you're setting yourself up for an ambush. So always everybody understands what their area of responsibility is before you start the search. Get that laid out. And then what happens if the dog bites somebody? How are we going to handle that? How long will it last? What are the markers for where the handler will go on or where the dog will come off? What do we need to see to make this work? All right. That being said, let's go ahead and cruise into this. The basic chain of behaviors for tracking is pretty simple. It's search for a track or trail, Then once you locate that track or trail, go ahead and discriminate that track layer and follow that track layer exclusively to the exclusion of all other people, including people that are standing around the scene who've milled over and crossed that track. So it's a good thing to teach your dogs to handle that and learn to exclude anybody that's there. And that means if you have an officer on containment that has come and contaminated your track, it would behoove you to get that person back so the dog can go ahead and exclude them on that. Because I can't tell you how many times we've had that happen and the dog follows a trail and finds a patrol car because somebody came in from the backside, walked across the track, and then went back to their car. Dog followed the freshest trail, and that was an officer. Once you get them excluded by being there, the dog will follow what they're supposed to if you train it right. Once they've done that and they follow, their job is to report. And if it's an article, I like a dog that downs. And I explain why I don't want him retrieving it. That's just me. I also like the down because it keeps the dog at ground level, which is where the tracking and trailing activity is, so that when I got to restart them, all they got to do is keep their nose to the ground, push their body up, and continue the move. But that's just me. You're free to do whatever you want. Some people, if they find an article, they want the dog to sit and stare. I don't care. If you take a look, there are some trainers from Europe who teach that no matter what, you're going to do a sit and stare. Matter of preference. You see other people from Germany where IGP is running the show for the sport world, and they're going to down at the article, and they better down in the direction of the track. I don't care. If the dog spins around and looks at me and says, looks at me and looks at it, looks at me, looks at it, I don't care. That works for me. If I have an accessible suspect, depending upon your training and operating model, they're either going to seize that person or bark, give you some indication that they found it. Some people will call this find and bite versus find and bark. I don't care what you call it because in the end, all the circumstances that dictate whether there's a bite or a bark are built around the same Graham versus Connor standards that the use of force by a dog has to be judged by that. And it's going to be judged more harshly because right now canine has a target on its back. And it's because, you know, it's a really visceral thing for people to watch a dog bite happening on body cameras. So bear in mind that when you do this, got to have all the justification for it. And if you do it right, do it well, get it done as quickly as you can. If the person's inaccessible, then, for example, they're going to bark and let you know. Dig or scratch can work for some people, but the bark is a clear thing that you can see, you can hear from a distance away. If they're digging and scratching, you may pick it up, but it may not be something you're going to pick up as far away as a good, steady bark. And when the dog works around a corner like that, that can give you a little bit of information that you wouldn't have otherwise. All right. And I want to talk about this brief piece about dog tracking evidence admissibility. Here are two West Coast cases, one from Washington, one from California. They both have exactly the same 5 qualifications. So Malgren was based off of Sokolov, which is the first case to do this, that the dog and handler qualify by training and experience to do the job. The dog had been trained in tracking humans. The dog has been reliable in actual cases in pursuing human track. And that was later to be determined that the team has been able to do blind track. So it's got to be actual suspect cases, but actual cases where the handler doesn't know where the track is. The dog was placed on the track where circumstances indicated the guilty party to have been, and the track was not so stale or contaminated to be beyond the dog's competency to follow. In the early years, we underestimated the contaminated piece. We spent a lot of time on stale, on working longer delays. We found actually that was less of a concern for us than the contamination piece. And so you got to do the work and you got to show that you've done that stuff. Once you do that, then your dog can actually give you a testimonial link between the location where the person was last seen, i.e. the scene of the crime or the last place they were seen when they fled from the crime, to where you located them. Not all states accept dog tracking evidence, but for those that do, these 5 prongs are probably your best bet to being able to convince a jury that your dog was right. If you do this and you do it right, you're going to have something that no other tool in the police inventory can bring. All right. If you want to get really good at reading a tracking or trailing dog or a search dog, I suggest you use Steve McKenzie's 8 scent work indicating behaviors. Now, we had a video about this called 1,000-Hour Eyes that's on the USPCA Canine YouTube channel. Take a look at it. because if you understand these things, you can create a mental track map as you're going in where little things that other people might miss, you see in your dog and you make note of them in relation to the environment. And so you know where to go back and check that maybe something is worth it. And these were built off of Dr. Stephen McKenzie's 8 scent work indicators. And they're basically about seeing changes of your dog when they are on or off track or in or out of scent. And they are pull, nose height, tail carriage, breathing cadence, circling, crabbing, and head swing. I'm not going to go into the particulars here because I got a whole presentation about that. But get to know how your individual dog manifests. Each dog is unique. They're going to have different ways of indicating on it. Learn your dog, become an expert in your dog because that's what you have to testify, not about dogs in general, but about how your dog manifests these things. Now, the best dogs in the world, I've seen some superb tracking dogs, but I've never seen a dog that throughout an entire track is 100% on all the time. We have to stop thinking of tracks as being a linear thing. Now, I know if you're going to go in IGP competition, that's how they're scored. Is does the dog hit every footprint along the way? But our score sheet's the booking sheet. And so for us, it's a pass fail test. And the pass fail part of this is did your dog connect the dots? It's not a linear event, it's a connect the dots picture. And when the dog is on track, you should be able to see it. And when the dog is off track, you should be able to see it. You should know your dog's track loss indicators. The difference between somebody who just follows a dog and somebody who really knows how to handle the dog and get the dog in productive areas is the one that can really read those track loss indicators, understands their dog's surface preferences, that this is strong at that. She can handle any surface change except this one, things like that. And then you're going to know that you can go ahead and get back on track by a variety of different methods like circling, casting. Dogs will do this on their own. They will show these things later on. You're going to go ahead and try and mimic some of this later on. But the things that you see from dogs when they lose track, a lot of times it's going to be circling and casting. Casting, if they're casting on the track, it will get wider, or they'll circle, or they'll kind of figure eight around. One way or the other, the pace changes as they go through this. You're also going to see their breathing change because all of a sudden they may get panicked about this. They may have been going along really fine, and all of a sudden, oh, I've lost it, and they're really going to focus. And then other dogs, when they lose it, they're like, oh wow, and their head comes up and they open their mouth and they do that. You've got to know how your dog manifests this stuff. Now, handlers, when you see this and you see a track loss indication, give your dog a chance for themselves to figure it out and sort it out. Don't get in the way too quickly. But if it gets to the point where the dog doesn't seem to be able to recover, now you have a chance to go ahead and jump in and help them out. So go back past the last place on track. When you see a spot where you said, oh, he's lost it, he probably lost it somewhere behind that, farther back. So give yourself a chance to get back where the dog was really solid on that and develop some behavioral momentum on that to get it and iron it out. Then, probably the easiest one to do real quick if something's lost is cast in such a way that your dog has a chance to work the area where you see them have that loss. Then once they get behind that, you can try looping, you can try that cloverleaf. And by that last place on track is what that LP on T is. And cloverleafing is a technique specific to intersections. It was first really brought out by the RCMP's canine unit up in Canada, and their dog section did amazing work out in the woods, but they struggled on urban environments. And they said, we're not going to bother teaching hard surface because we're out in the woods all the time. So they were just cloverleaf intersections. And I'll show you the technique. I would say also before you do any of these things, teach your dog that down is a good thing on a track. Down is a good thing on a track when it finds an article and it gets paid there. Down is a good thing on the track because that means we're going to do something fun. And that they learn that pauses, downing means maybe I'm close and we're going to go ahead and have a fun game with the track player or the bad guy, or it means that we're going to go ahead and get to check another area. But down means pause now. It's not stop, you're in trouble. It means just pushing pause on the video stream. Now, I'm looking at my faces right here, and Lou Furlan's here. Dr. Furl and I are sitting right here. We're old enough to remember the days of VHS, when you pushed pause on a VHS, you had this murky picture of what was on the screen, and you didn't know what was coming next. Then DVDs got a little better picture, and now streaming, you get an even better picture. All right. And that's what you want. You want to do this so often that the dog knows it's like pushing pause in that stream and they got a 4K picture of what's coming next, what's in front of them. And that pauses are good at intersections before you're crossing traffic, that they learn it's safe. I'm going to do this. And then we're going to get to the other side. We're going to continue having fun. Or we're going to go right down the middle of the street for a block. Create those pauses. And anytime you got an environmental hazard, got down your dog and get that environmental hazard resolved. Figure out how you're going to get around it, move it out of the way, or, how you're going to get your dog picked up and past it. Suspect hazards. If I'm getting close and my dog is giving me an indication, I may not want my dog just charging in there, grabbing this thing. I'll put it this way. If I've got a guy, if it's in thick brush and my dog is now bouncing around in that brush, I could let that dog go in there and engage that person. But then as soon as they're on there, things have to accelerate. You got to go in there and start getting that person in or trying to get them out. And if the dog's online and they've gone through thick brush, that person's route out may actually tangle that dog up and now you got problems. So why not, when that dog gives you that indication and you've got a potential suspect hazard, down the dog, give a challenge, give that person the chance to give up, give time to you and your team to figure out a new tactical plan, revise and adapt your tactical plan so that you can account for what you have laying in front of you right now and make a decision about how you're going to address it. Really, really powerful tool for that dog. And they just learn and they're building energy on that down. They're just like, oh yeah, good stuff's coming. Good stuff's coming. And we go from there. These are the things that really make for an effective team. And by the way, it also gives the dog and you a chance to go ahead and get the lizard brain controlled and get your forebrain doing the work. Get up there where you're the one actually in control of this. Your other officers are in control and clear, and they can handle that threat with calm, clear, focused. All right, so casting. You go along the track, it looks like this. Now the dog gets to this point. There's a track loss indication like this. And all you're going to do with this, a lot of slow, methodical dogs will show this behavior. Once I get there, I plant my feet and I just pivot with my lead like this. And by the way, I'm a weirdo. I admit it. I'm not going to say anything else. I will go ahead and hold the lead with my strong hand, my gun hand, my right hand back behind my hip near my firearm. And then my left hand acts as a shock absorber and a guide. So it's cradled in my left hand. That way, if I have to address a threat with my firearm, all I have to do is tighten my left hand, release the right hand, and draw. If I'm holding the lead just with my left hand all the time, that arm gets jerked around and can give the dog unintentional corrections. So I use that as my approach to it, and it keeps my hand by my gun all the time. The time to draw is very quick and you're very capable of getting around. Now, when you get to this recovering point on this, I'm going to do that cast with my hands like that I described. I'm going to move the dog. A lot of dogs tend to curve right, so I'm showing this as a curve right. I'm going to go ahead and let them do this. And I'm going to step back and I'm going to try and step with that cast enough and pivot with them and get at least twice as far as where the last point. Let's say the last point I saw him was between the dot and where that blue line intersects, where I felt like the dog was really solid. Then I'm going to try and swing them back past that so they get a chance. That little spiral comes back. If that isn't it, then I'm going to go back and try one of the other approaches. Looping is another approach. Looping is like casting, but it's in succession. You're just going to do a cast and another cast and another cast until you get back to a point where the dog can really pick it up again. If that's not it, you may go back to another place where you have a clear spot or an article or something that you can use as a restart point and do that. But it really is just nothing more than a series of successive casts. Slow or fast dogs will manifest this one. You'll be able to use it with slow or fast dogs. It doesn't matter. They're both capable of this. You'll find that slow methodical dogs will pick it up earlier. Some of the faster dogs need to get back and a couple of shots at it. So now we're track loss again. At this point, we go back backtrack, and then we'll go across and back across again, giving the dog a chance to encounter something that it might have missed that time. Maybe they'll pick up an arc or a turn or a scent pool that they missed on the way out there. So it's similar to the search approach. The same thing is going to be there. Then when I'm going to restart, if it doesn't do anything, I'm going to go back farther down, backtrack, and try again. Again, I try and make sure that the first part of the tee is far enough back the dog has a reasonable chance of success of picking something up. I find that fast, hard pulling dogs, this works pretty well. They're not just spinning around in a loop. It gives them something that they can go across, they can pull across. And if you have a hard pulling dog that is just trying to get across something, and then all of a sudden they stop and they change direction, you probably ought to pay attention to that. One way or the other, the farther back you go on this, probably the better for them. This fast dogs will wind up needing that little extra time to get themselves locked in. Now, cloverleafing, again, I'm going to go back to my old friends in British Columbia taught me this technique, and they never bothered trying to track in the street or across the street. They just cloverleafed and worked the sides. So track comes along, dog loses the scent at the intersection. Then you're going to loop back, and the dog is going to circle and try and cast around, and they're going to do that stuff. You'll see that that's their manifestation there in that red. That's them casting on their own. At that point, now we're going to go ahead and move across the street and then loop there. Nope, nothing there. Okay. Now we're really going to do the cloverleaf in earnest. We tried casting to give the dog a chance to pick it up. It's not there. It's there. I'm going to go back where I had the track before. And now I'm going to move the dog there and back down that side. Then we're going to go across over here and move the dog up and across at each intersection the same way, getting all four corners far enough down. And it will depend upon your dog how far that is. But the whole point of this is to get far enough down there that if that person went somewhere, remember, they didn't levitate out of here, you'll be able to pick them up if they went on the sides. I prefer dogs that are really comfortable on the hard surface. So I like dogs that don't just do this as a cursory thing. So one of the ways to do this, if you teach a dog to down at articles, and that's a pay station, is just start putting small articles in the middle of the street so that when they're doing the cloverleaf, they can actually pick something up while they're going through the street. But after a while, you start putting articles and people or the track continuing on there, they'll pick up on it. They'll learn to do that. Those are my basic recovery tactics that I had been taught through the years. You know, the T was the one I learned first for search dogs in the military back in 1975 at Lackland Air Force Base. But now other people have shown me this. I haven't had an original thought in my life. And if you have other tactics, let us know. When this video goes up, write in the comments. Say what you think is a superior approach, another way to look at this, a different way to resolve these problems. Because as we go through this, we have to realize that the basics are always there, that everything we do with our dogs is part of this three behavior chain. And that as we go ahead and do our jobs together, the dog has a role, I have a role, and as a team, we accomplish something together. And that team's role fits into the larger search team's role. So all of these things nest. It's like a bunch of tchotchke dolls that we all fit inside each other like that. You know, your search strategies can vary. I started out in Seattle where we tracked off lead in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and everything was fast and loose, running at a dead run, and your dog better have a bulletproof down to keep it from getting run over by cars. To a more urbanized environments where actually slow and methodical was like it mirrored the change in tactics for tactical operations. And you got to remember, every canine search is a de facto tactical operation. You might as well do what good tactical operators do, is go slow and methodical. And your search strategies may vary, but always realize that when your tactics are going to be applied, you're going to have to let other people know what you're doing. And your tactics for searches are going to be different than your tactics for tracking because you're looking for a specific person on a track. And in a search, you're looking for anybody that's an area. That presents all kinds of things. But one of the things I can tell you that, you know, our dogs, over a 7-year period, we tracked it, passed over by 10,000 innocent parties. And we wound up with a 99.97% correct response rate where they didn't go and accost the wrong person. That's a pretty strong thing. That could give you peace of mind when you're tracking. Whereas for a search, anybody that's in there changes your mindset as you go through this. Keep your standard patrol tactics. Don't do anything you wouldn't do as a regular patrol officer just because you have a dog. And have somebody there to help you stay in your tactics. Adapt your search tactics as a team. Communicate with your team and let them know things are changing. We're going to change this because of what my dog is telling us. And before you get there, train for these conditions. Don't operate outside the scope of your training. All right. Always trying to push the edges of your capabilities out, but operate within your skill set and train for the things that you actually expect to face in the real world. Your USPCA Best Practices Group is proud to offer this to you. These are the members right now. We welcome for the first time his name appears on our masthead as Executive Director, Daniel Jones. Don Slavic has moved over. He's chair of the Best Practices Group. This concludes our USPCA Best Practices webinar on scent work fundamentals and patrol dog fundamentals in particular. Train hard, work easy, stay safe, folks.
This video was brought to you by the United States Police Canine Association. If you found this information helpful, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. For more information, check out our website, www.uspcacanine.com and at USPCA Canine. Thank you for watching and stay safe.